I'm excited to be doing this. I'm excited to be talking about this topic today. I'm excited for this episode. Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Joel. I am feeling confident. I'm happy to be back with the headphones on and the microphone out. It has been a little bit, and I think it's been a nice break, even though our episodes haven't been released as a
Yeah.
break. But it's nice to be getting the creative mindset back and thinking about like what do we want our next episodes to look like? What do we want kind of to we're starting to think about what do we want to close out the year with,
Yeah.
right? We've got what 3 4 more months left, and I mean that's we want to finish strong. We want to power through this.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to dig into some fun topics and talk about how to show up well at work when we're the youngest. I mean, not everyone is the youngest, right? But a lot of our listeners and you and I both are definitely youthful
Yeah.
voices at our work.
Well,
And
and this is something that like you and I both have run into in our like young careers also, right? They're like so out of college, like I worked at a startup for about 6 months. Descript, it's what we used to record. And then I went and worked at Intel for a couple of years. And like at Intel, I was 23 and I was on this team, and I think the second youngest guy on the team was like a guy who now is a good friend. He just had his first kid, who was 39 when I was on the team.
mm,
So it's a big difference. He was driving before I was born, right? And then the other people on the team were like in their 40s and 50s, and great people that were fun to work with, but there very much was kind of like this intern stigma that I had interned with Intel and like was 23 when all these people were in their late 30s and 40s and 50s, right? And so yeah, I think you and I both have run into that, and now you're kind of in that now too.
yeah, I had an internship, and then that turned into a job and the start of my career, which has been awesome. But it's been really interesting to shift from being like obviously the youngest person because
Yeah,
like yeah, I'm an intern, I'm still in college, yada yada college, and then I like was working part-time through college, same company. And so that was really part, it's like show up, how's your week? Well, classes were busy,
yeah,
right? It's very obvious, it's very baked in. And then pretty much immediately after graduation took a couple weeks, and now it's like, oh, now I show up every day and this is my job.
yeah,
And it's I've become a little bit more of a peer and more of a colleague rather than the intern.
yeah.
But there's still a little bit of that like making my way through those dynamics and fighting through to be like, no, like I know my stuff and I have this ability and like I am a colleague,
Yeah.
right? I am a peer.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've talked about like the huge life transition that it is to be the college student. Like college students are young. Like Ryan Halley, one of our first guests, talked about the biggest shift when you're no longer in school to like once you've graduated is that you don't have like a student ID card anymore. Not in like a
Hmm.
physical sense, but in the sense that like everybody's happy to help college students. Like college students are like they're cute and they're kids and they're fun and like everybody's like, ah, I remember being young and dumb like you.
All untapped potential and no refinement,
Right.
right? No polish,
Right.
all
And then
ambition.
suddenly you're a full-time staff and you don't want to be young and cute anymore. Like now you're like, no, I'm
Hmm.
working at this. Like I'm accomplishing things. I'm building up my skills. I'm building up my resume.
Yeah, well, and as a college student, you especially in like an internship type space, like you don't typically have a ton of responsibility,
No.
and so anything happens, like you kind of have a get out of jail free card almost, like
Yeah.
whatever, you're a college student, and then all of a sudden, like you start adding on real responsibilities, and you don't want to have other people cleaning up your mistakes or
No.
anything, and it's not like that we're making a ton of mistakes, but there's a dynamic shift there
Absolutely.
of.
Absolutely. And I think like when I was a student, I did a lot of like almost like consulting projects with companies and like local companies that knew this school that I was at and like that sort of thing. And I was like, oh my goodness, the work that I am doing is changing these companies' lives, is changing the course of these companies like fully. And now that I'm
Mhm.
like a company that hires interns, I'm like, oh yeah, we give the interns like the easiest stuff that we're like not that worried about. It's like not that high of a priority, and like if it doesn't get done, it's like that's fine. Like it's we were gonna do it anyway, like 6 months down the line, whenever somebody had space for it. So we'll just kick it to the intern and see what happens. And I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
shift from being given those projects, of the projects that like, oh yeah, no, I guess it is cool that you did this, to then having the projects that people are like, hey, you have deliverables, and like we need an update in staff meeting, and like, yeah, have you not made any progress on that? Because we expected you to make progress on that. That's important. It's a huge shift. It's a huge shift.
It really is. It really is. And a lot of different dynamics start to come into play. And there's a lot of really fun aspects of that where you can start being a lot more collaborative. And, you go from, like you mentioned, oh, I'm changing the trajectory of these companies to like, I'm part of this company and I have buy-in, I have weight, I
Yep.
have uh, a reason for showing up. And like, these aren't, especially an internship, like, maybe like ideally you're hoping that turns into a long-term position, but you don't know, and
Yeah.
it's typically 3 to 4 months maybe, or even a project in college. You're like, this is a semester, right?
Right.
You want to show up well enough that you get a good letter of recommendation if that's what you need, whereas then it's like, oh, this is my colleague maybe for 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah,
possible,
there's no
right?
longer end dates, right? Like, I mean, you
Yeah.
could be on contract work, right? But like if you have like a full-time job, like you don't have end dates anymore. And like there's some uncertainty that comes with that, as far as like, well, how long do I stick with a company? How long do I stay there, and those sorts of things. But I think there's also like um that buy-in that you're talking about, of like, oh, I actually do care a little bit about how this company does, because maybe my compensation is tied to earnings targets, or maybe my compensation is
Hmm.
tied, like I work in sales, like maybe it's tied to how many sales I make, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm more invested in my company when like I get paid when they get paid, right? Like I hope they get paid a lot then. So
Right, right. Or even just maybe you don't have a direct tie in with revenue, but the better service you're providing, the better product you're creating, the better uh, task you are fulfilling, well, the better you're showing up. And then people see that, and then your performance reviews happen. And then, like, that's when promotions and raises happen.
yep.
So you're still, and just getting more clout and getting more maybe interesting work as well. You don't want to be delegated to those 6 months down the road we might have done it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So even still, like I run into this less in my current company than I did in my last, but my current company just has a younger average age, so I'm not an anomaly anymore. Like I'm not the youngest person at the company, or the youngest person in my department. But you still run into this more, and I ran into this a lot while I was at Intel, where there's kind of this sometimes vocalized, sometimes not vocalized, but still felt, still implied.
Hmm.
This message that because you're young, you must be an intern. That A is either working on projects that aren't that important, so I don't need to give you my full time or attention, or B, like you don't really know what you're doing. Like one of those things like comes across sometimes, especially like when I was at Intel, it would happen working with new people. Like my team didn't feel that way very often. Like my team rarely felt that way. They would make jokes about how young I was, but it wasn't like there wasn't nothing behind it. Whereas, well, there probably was, but there wasn't much behind it. Whereas like people that I worked with outside of my team, outside of my like regular day to day people, they would kind of be like, are you sure? Like,
Wait, how old are you
yeah.
actually?
Yeah.
And just kind of like feeling for like, when was college for you?
Yeah. Like I went to a happy
Are you
hour.
still in college? Or-
Yeah, I went to like a happy hour once, and somebody was like, "Hey, like can you like are you allowed, like should you be here?" And I was like,
are you allowed to go to
are
the
you
bar?
trying to ask me if I'm 21? Because yeah. Like yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? I'm just like showing up like a 19-year-old, like trying to sneak into the bar to fit
Yeah.
in with the
Yeah.
coworkers.
Man. So talk about how you run into that in like your work.
Yeah, I would say I resonate pretty similarly. It was like the people who I work with who've known me even since my internship and seen my work and my way of showing up. Yeah, sometimes they'll joke about it, right? We do crack open a bottle of wine. It's like, Jesse, do you know how to open a bottle of wine?
Yeah.
Or And like, no, I learned how to do that at my internship,
Right.
right? So there's some truth to it. There's some humor in it. Or like, are you allowed to
Yeah.
drink? But it's like those are people who I have a built up relationship with, and it's good fun, right?
Yeah.
It's humorous. It's back and forth. We're bantering, and that's fun. But there have been a couple of times where like we'll hire a new person, and I'm like, hey, here's something I
Hmm.
know. You're welcome to kind of shadow on this, or maybe I'm leading a training, and there's kind of this like, well, like, how old are you?
Uh,
I'm 22 and I know this thing. Like,
yeah.
I'm one taking the time out of my work schedule to like help you understand this. And also like, yeah, like just because I'm 22 doesn't mean that I'm not familiar with my job, doesn't mean that I'm not familiar with the role.
Yeah.
And so there can be a little bit of that like, I'm really being trained by a 22-year-old right now.
Mm.
And I really don't think it's a slight toward me. I think it's more of like maybe a little bit of insecurity that shows up of, wow, I'm just changing into this job, and like I was not expecting somebody who looks like this to be the person training me, right?
Mm.
And so maybe there's a little bit of that, but it is kind of like it feels a little undermining in moments like that,
Absolutely.
where like, so what that I'm 22? Like I know
Yeah.
my stuff here. Like if I'm telling you this and communicating it clearly, like if you have an issue with the way I'm communicating it or teaching it, like that's fine, let me know. But if you just don't believe me on the basis of I'm 22, like
Yeah. What am I supposed to
what good
do?
is
What
that
is
doing
this?
for anybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Man, so
So,
one of the things that I think, like the trap that people that are kind of in your situation, I think one of the trap that people fall into with that I think I saw myself falling into some, is that like owning that and making that like a piece of your identity. Like I had a coffee chat with a
hmm
guy, like I was in a program like a while back and had a coffee chat with a guy, where he was the young one, and that was his brand. That was the thing that he was excited about. Like when I talked to him, and we like chatted like a couple of times, and at the end of one of them we'd been chatting for like, I don't know, 45 minutes, something like that. And at the end I was like, hey, I gotta jump off, but like if you ever need like any marketing things or anything with like a podcast or something, like that's kind of my wheelhouse, that's what I do, like let me know, I'd love to be a resource for you if you ever need it. And he like responded, and maybe he was caught off guard, maybe he just like doesn't, maybe he didn't have something prepped like that or anything, but he responded and he was like, yeah, like if you ever want like a youthful perspective or something, like let me know. And I was like, what the fuck? Like I'm 25, you're maybe 23. Like what youthful perspective am I gonna like want from you
uh,
simply because you're a young person? I'm like, you're like 18 months younger than me. Like
right.
I don't think that I'm gonna be like, hey, what are like what's like the kids into?
What are the young people thinking these days?
Yeah, like what? And it just was such a baffling thing that I was like, this shouldn't be your full identity for a few things. Like one, because it's pointless. Like there's no edge
hmm
to that inherently.
hmm
Two, you're gonna get older. Like
Yeah, it is inherently and automatically temporary,
yes,
right?
like you're not.
Like what happens when you hire the next intern and you're not the young person anymore? What
Yes,
happens when it's just 5 years later and you're not the young person anymore?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I think it like it does. I like the word undermine. That like it undermines like your credibility. That like if I'm someone
hmm
that's out here and I am confident in what I know, it doesn't matter how old I am because I'm confident in what I know. And I think the
yeah,
like insecurity comes out to be like, oh well, like I'm a kid. Like I like take it easy on me,
right,
like I'm a kid,
right,
right? And it's like,
yeah,
oh, I didn't know I was supposed to treat you differently, but now that you're signaling that, I
right.
will.
Yeah, yeah. You're undermining yourself at that point where
Yeah.
like, especially getting into the corporate workplace, like, no, I can stand on the fact like I have a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bachelor's degree in my field as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so I can stand on that and just like, it's not like I'm walking around every day and being like, well, I am a bachelor of arts or bachelor of science, anything like that. But I'm like, no, I have a degree. I have credibility, whatever that means. Like, and then from there, I'm able to jump in and actually learn the stuff and then now be comfortable and know this stuff.
The most important thing when you are young in your career and when it is noticeable that yeah, you're younger than the other people there, is building your reputation not on the fact that you're the youngest, but building your reputation on tangible skills, that you do good work, that you follow up, that you're organized, that you show up on time, that you stay engaged, that you ask questions, that you're energetic. Like there are traits that come with youthfulness that are really positive. It's not naivete. It's not a lack of experience. It's not that you're hip with the times. Like, it's none of those things that you're like up on trends. Like, those things maybe will come into play sometimes, but really what's
Like
valuable?
occasionally, like
Yeah.
once a
Yeah.
month,
If
maybe.
even that much. Like, occasionally that'll come up. Like working in marketing, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, like no, I'm more connected to the trends because I use this more than you do, sort of a thing. But like really, you should be building your reputation on your quality of work and on these positive traits that you have, rather than this one that you can't do anything about.
Right. Well, and like there are things that aren't automatic for being young, and they're not excluded once you aren't the youngest, but like kind of
Hmm.
traditional, potentially traditional traits would be like curiosity, energy, ambition. Maybe it's literally time, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't have a family that I'm responsible for at this point in time. So I'm able to work a little bit late sometimes without having to be like, oh, I've got to get to my kid's baseball game. Which, like, no slight to people who have to get their kid's baseball game. That's
Yeah.
great. But like I do have that, just like that is a part of my circumstance right now that I'm like, I had to stay a little bit late to problem solve something. Cool. Learn something new. Cool.
Yeah.
And so lean into like those, like just the strengths that are inherent. Um, and again, build off, it kind of goes back a little bit to our like values episode, a little bit of
Hmm.
like in the workplace, have the value of like being curious and wanting to learn
Yeah.
more and, and show up diligently and do good work and like value details, value accuracy, value creativity.
Yeah. And I think those are things that are, it's easy not to do. Like, those are not things that come intuitively necessarily, but if you build that into your reputation, even though you're young, like, people will start to see you as someone that's like, wow, this person takes notes in all of our meetings. Like, this person like writes when we talk in meetings, and there's like tasks that it's like, like Joel's got to do that. Like, is Joel writing that down, and is Joel then doing that thing later? Is Joel asking clarifying questions? Like, those are the things that like you should be doing, because people are willing to help, right? It's not that you need to have it all together and pretend that you're old. Like, that's not what it needs to be at all. But there's like, take notes, prepare, plan, ask questions. And also, man, Jesse, talk about asking bad questions.
No, I mean you don't want to like jump into a conversation with someone asking a question where you don't know what you're trying to ask,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to show up and like somebody's working there in their zone. You were like, I bumped into my very first roadblock. Walk over there. Hey, can you tell me what this is?
Don't ask stuff that you
Like,
can Google questions before you
don't
ask
ask.
them.
Yeah, don't ask stuff you can Google. Don't ask questions like if you haven't read, maybe your company has guides and
Mm.
documentation. Like, it's not like you have to read the entire library of that, but
Do a quick search
like
though.
do a quick search, right? See if you can figure it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, try to figure it out. Try to find, what I always do is, okay, I've got this new piece of paperwork to fill out for a client. I haven't done this before, but I'm going to look and see what client we have done this
Mm.
before and see like what paperwork did we fill out
Yeah.
then, and then find the task for that and read through it and see the notes. And it's like, oh, somebody said this got an error message and they had to do this to problem solve it. Well, great. I feel pretty confident that
Yeah.
that's somewhat the answer. And then maybe a little bit later I'll go run it by the person who I'm kind of collaborating with, like, hey, this is what I saw, this is what I found, does that seem right to you? Like, does that make sense? And yeah, then they can you can kind of ask on their experience and like,
Yeah.
yes, or, oh, I remember this other detail. Look in this. But you don't want to just like, hey, solve this for me, right?
100%. And I think that's the trap that like I fell into when I first was like in the workforce, that I was like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Like, I'll just go ask. Right. And like Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, talks about this, part of the PayPal mafia. Like, he talks about this. And he would say, like, if you respect the person that you're asking a question for, come with a proposed solution. It can be a terrible solution. Like, it could be a bad answer, but do a little bit of work. You ran into this roadblock, come up with an idea of how to solve it, or a couple of ideas of how to solve it, and then come to your superior and be like, hey boss, I don't know how to do this thing, or I ran into this roadblock. I was thinking that I was going to do it in ABC way, but I don't think that's the best way to do it. Like, I see some problems with that. Is there something that I'm missing? And how would you tweak what I'm doing? Something like that.
Right.
Way better than showing up and being like, I don't know how to do this. Well,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a little bit like there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance here from like in college. It's like ask, like there's no such thing as a stupid
yeah.
question, right? Like it's like ask questions all the time, be curious. And there's not nuance there, right? Like there's like I didn't really learn this nuance until I started working in the workforce. But I think there's a couple other factors that come into play here where one, ask questions to the right people, like start to understand your organizational structure. And so thinking like the CEO of my company doesn't actually know how to do my job.
Yeah.
Because he's been doing CEO job and like lead advisor job for a long time, right? So I would not, even though I respect him a lot, one, I understand that my question isn't relevant to him, even if he did know the answer.
Yep.
There's somebody else who can solve it who maybe makes a little bit less per hour. But also, like, that's just like skipping some of the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And then it's also like, yeah, show up with kind of this, like, here's the steps I took. And you start to get a feel for like what's a reasonable amount of steps, right? Like you don't want to be banging your head against a wall for an hour and a half trying to solve.
Yeah.
Like, hey, oh, I especially if it's like a new website, it's like I found out this button wasn't enabled.
Right.
Like I was looking for an hour for this button that we need to put in a request to enable that for me. You don't want to do that.
One of my colleagues says, "Don't flounder. If you're floundering, ask somebody. Like if you're still like trying to problem solve it, that's fine. You can keep going to do it. If you start to flounder and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm confused, I'm struggling, you're starting to kind of tread water to keep your head above. No. Don't flounder. Like you can ask people questions if you start to do that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, and I had like, I had a funny example today. I had to fax out some paperwork.
Man, I don't know how to send a fax.
Yeah, I had not sent a fax at this company yet,
Yeah.
right? I was like, I don't know what this looks like, right? And so at first I'm looking on the website, not even realizing I have to fax it, right? And I'm looking, I'm like, I don't see like an open, like a send paperwork or an email or anything. So eventually I'm like, I've spent like 5-10 minutes looking at this, like ask my colleague, like, hey, what, are we supposed to send this through a button? Like I can't find anything. It's like, oh no, we're supposed to fax it. Like, great, go back. Try to find how to fax something for like 10 minutes, go and look again. Oh, okay, here's what we do for the fax, right? You need the cover sheet. You need the cover sheet to look like this. You need then a table of contents after the cover sheet. Then you need all the paperwork. It's like, okay, cool. I got that all prepped. Oh no, how do I send a fax, right? And so I tried to figure that out. But again, it's like, I spent like 10 minutes and I was like, hey, okay, another question, same person. It's like, do I fax it from the printer? It's like, no, we have a website that we use the fax for. It's like, great. I had never heard of that website. So like I could have spent hours, right, without landing there.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's a really reasonable time to ask a question, but it wasn't just like, hey, walk me through this whole process. Right. It's like, here's what I tried. Here's where I found, and some people would look for 5 minutes. I looked for 10 minutes. Some people would look for 20.
Yeah.
that's kind of a personal
Yeah.
preference, but you don't want to be like instantly like, here's all my
Well, and
questions.
then like if dude, I don't know how long it takes to send a fax. I don't know that task. I'm getting out of that. Like I'm gonna say something stupid about sending a fax. I have no clue. But like if your task, whatever it is, takes a half hour to do, and you spend 10 minutes trying to figure it out, can't do it. Ask a question. He points you in the right direction, and then you can do 20 minutes of the 30 minutes of work, and then you ask another question, they point you in the right direction again, and then you can do the last. Maybe it takes you 40 minutes, but it took them 2 because they didn't have to walk you through most of it. They
Yeah.
had the like,
Yeah.
on the flow chart of things to do. There were only 2 points where you were confused or where you like genuinely had no guesses.
Right, right. And I think there's a couple of benefits to this. So there is, I want to say, when you're like still a trainee,
Yeah.
like fully trainee, learning the websites and everything, it is good to shadow, right? It is good to like, I'm just gonna sit at your desk and watch you do your job because your job is gonna be my
Right.
job, and like that's a good thing. Um, and it's also good, like, okay, you showed me how to do this once, now I'm gonna do this once with you watching, right?
Mm.
Like that's a good way to do it as well. That's kind of how I was trained, and it was
You do
really
it, we
effective.
do it, I do it.
Exactly. But I think once you're kind of out of that, it's nebulous again. But 2 to 3 months period, like then it's really not worth it to like, let me watch you. And then the real benefit, I think the twofold benefit once you're out of those training woods, is one, you learn better by a problem that you solved.
Yes.
Like once I've solved a problem, it's not something I'll easily forget, and it's something I actually become pretty confident
Yeah.
on when it comes up again. And then I can build on that, and one, build on the muscle of having problem solve something, and two, build on the like, oh yeah, I remember this task. How could I make it better? Like, why did I even run into that
Yeah.
problem? And then maybe optimize that. And so it learns better. And as we're saying again, like you're showing up in a workplace with other coworkers and colleagues that you're trying to earn the respect of. And so showing up well there, being a problem solver, being somebody who asks good questions and doesn't waste somebody else's time on a busy day, especially, is like you learn better. So you're benefiting. And your coworkers are like
Yes.
impressed. So like you're all benefiting, right?
And they're not spending their time doing your job and getting frustrated with you, which is possible.
Exactly.
Like, which is possible,
Yes.
right? We don't all get to be the
Yeah.
main character. Like, it's not
Right.
all about us, right? And so I think like having
Yeah.
that humility to be like, no, I gotta just go. Some of these things, like I gotta just go spend 20 minutes trying to figure out, so that I know what question I'm asking, rather than being
Right.
like, I
Ro-
don't know how to do this. Like, and
exactly.
don't spend six
Rob
hours on
Cuccia.
a problem before you, like, if you got no,
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. There's a balance
There
beam
is.
there, right? But Rob Cucciaro, who's a financial planner in the Bay Area, who wrote the Financial Advisor Field Guide, great book and great person to listen to, talks about like having, and he's talking about financial advisories, right? But he talks about having A-level players all throughout. And so if you've got your like CEO maybe gets $1,000 an hour, and then your first assistant, whatever that title is worth $200 an hour, and then your like entry level's worth $25 an hour, you never want your $1,000 to be doing $25 an hour work. But you need A-level people at all those levels, because an A-level person here will do this work if they're seeing it's not getting done well.
Yeah.
And so like show up, the A-level person in the entry level doesn't have the expertise to be here yet, but can still be really accurate, diligent, detailed, whatever, and collaborative and problem
I
solving.
like that a lot. For those of you just listening to the audio, Jesse was doing a lot of hand motions that even explained that a little further, that you're not catching on Spotify. But I just look it up on YouTube or something, and it makes sense. Or just, spend 20 minutes, just go try and map it
It
out.
felt
Go try and
pretty.
map it out. Don't come ask me, like, I'm doing stuff, like Jesse's doing
Joel's
stuff, like,
busy.
don't
Joel's
spend
busy.
like 20 minutes trying to figure this out before you come bother us with it. Just put some effort into it, okay? Like, um, no, I think that's a really good point, and I think that is like really applicable as a target. That like one of the things that I think is so important as a young person is setting realistic and achievable expectations. That your expectations for your role, like in my first role at Intel is a company that has 120,000 employees. I'm not going to revolutionize their company. I may make an impact on my team. I'm not going to make an impact on the company's bottom line. The only way that I could is negative. Like if there's some big
Right.
lawsuit or something, right? And so your goal is not to change the world, to get a documentary made about you at that title, at that role, right? As I was like a marketing specialist. But your goal can be to get an A grade as a marketing specialist, to be doing your work, to be prepared, to be organized, to be showing up, to be respectful, to be asking questions, to maybe even do the work of a marketing manager, like a step above you. Like that's achievable, right? That all is achievable. What's not achievable is that you have earned a documentary to be made about your life in, the first 6 months on the job, right? So
Right, right. No, exactly. Like be realistic about this. A lot of these are kind of lofty expectations that we're throwing out, but I think they're pretty not bite-sized exactly, but manageable, right? Like actionable.
yeah,
Spend your 20 minutes trying to figure things
yeah,
out. Don't make your age your identity. Do good work. Be
yeah.
curious.
Ask good questions, ask thoughtful
Ask
questions.
good
Yep, do
questions.
some prep before you ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's probably other stuff that we could talk about here, but it's just the two of us. We don't need to ramble on forever. And we still have a book giveaway that we're doing right now.
We
365
do.
Days of Freelance Writing by Carter Kilman. If you did not listen to last week's episode, why are you listening to this one still? Go over, listen to last week's episode with Carter Kilman. It was a great episode. He talked about a bunch of fun stuff. Some of the most interesting stuff that he talked about was freelance writing and becoming a freelancer full time, running a business that has one employee, being the solopreneur, being the digital nomad, living the dream with that. And if you're interested at all in that, you should read 365 Days of Freelance Writing because it's very actionable. It's way more actionable than most advice you'll get from freelancers because truly Carter sat down for a full year and wrote down
His
his
first year.
first year, and he wrote down his experiences every day, and he wrote down his monthly earnings, and he wrote down what he worked on, and he wrote down screenshots of pitches and graphs of earnings and income and all of those things. It's a good read if you're interested in any of that. So, Jesse,
Text us at 503-893-2664.
hallelujah.
That's all you need to do. Text us your name for an entry. Text us your favorite episode so far
Of becoming
for another
ourselves.
entry. Of
I
becoming
don't need to know which
ourselves.
episode of The Bear you were really into. Although if you want to tell me
Yeah.
that, like that's fine. I'm gonna start watching it soon.
The actual, if you text us your favorite episode of I Think You Should Leave / your favorite
Okay,
sketch,
we'll always
that
take your
will
favorite sketch. But I
count.
think you should leave.
Yep. The Driving Crooner is
Ah,
my current fave.
the Driving Croon is a great
You're
one.
riding with the Driving Crooner, baby.
Driving Croon is a great
Love-
one. Driving Croon is a great
Love
one.
that one.
Friday night, I'm thinking that we just might run away. That's one of my favorites. A goodie back in season 1.
Oh man,
Man.
throwback.
Oh, yeah.
You're an OG
Oh
fan.
yeah.
What were the other things we said?
Shoot, I
if you
forgot
text
what we
us an
were
episode
talking about.
idea for the entry for the book giveaway.
Yeah. Your name, Your favorite episode of okay, now we're expanding it. Of Becoming Ourselves or your favorite I Think You Should Leave sketch. Your name
Uh,
and what's the last one, Jesse?
an idea episode for a future idea or a future guest or a
That's
topic.
right. That is spot on.
Anything there inspires us. We love hearing that.
Yep.
So
It does.
love engaging with our listeners.
It does.
And hearing what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Just a heads up for what's coming with this podcast. We got a couple more weeks of just the two of us, which will be fun. We've got some fun topics. We probably are going to do a greatest hits episode, looking at some of our favorite takeaways from past episodes. We're still talking about what we want that to look like, but a podcast clip show.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe we don't want that.
Trying new things.
Yeah, but we probably are going to look at something like that. And then we have two fantastic guests that are coming in September already booked. We have some others in mind that we are talking to, but nothing on this schedule yet.
We're courting a couple of guests. Yeah.
Yes, courting. Yes, I thought you just like cut off the start of recording. I was like,
oh,
what are we talking about?
We're going out with guests. We're seeing how things are going.
We're dating. Yeah, we'll see.
We'll make the ask.
Yeah, we'll see if we get anything. We'll see how it works. But yeah, we've got some ideas for that. So we do have two that are committed to great people. Both of them are very impressive. Have done a lot of very cool things.
Becoming Ourselves fans, thank you so much for listening to our show. We really appreciate it. We love doing this project. We're having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun seeing that other people enjoy this.
Yes, and we are like. It's so cool to open up like our analytics platforms and see that like, man, views are going up, people are listening, people are paying attention. That is such encouragement, such motivation. We are in August already. We're recording August 17th. We have as many downloads in August as we did our first full month of publishing, the month of April. We already have as many, and we're halfway through the month. So it's been a blast. It's been really cool. It's been cool to like have people text in. It's been cool. It's cool to have people actually show up for giveaways. What a cool thing. Anyway, it truly is a blast to be doing Becoming Ourselves. I think it has helped.
Thanks for listening.
I think it has helped me become myself. And with that, there's only one thing left to say. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.